This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Let's talk about the chaos that could ensue around the courthouse on Tuesday when Donald Trump is brought in through an underground garage to be booked, processed, arrested, fingerprinted, and DNA'd by federal marshals working with the probation department, while outside there's a gathering storm of all of his supporters, MAGA, Trumpers, protesters, and hooligans that want to show up and conduct mischief at an invitation by Donald Trump, who was asked for their appearance almost down to the T, like he did in Jan 6th, asking for things to be wild and to show up in Washington. He's equally asked people to support him, defend him, protect him from a out of control, in his view, weaponized Department of Justice led by Joe Biden. And with all of that drumbeat, the constant refrain, not just of him, but other MAGA leaders, including Carrie Lake, who talks about a Second Amendment solution that should be used with Jack Smith and Merrick Garland, which should be the opening of an investigation by at least the Secret Service based on those attacks, and by the Department of Justice and FBI. Why do I think that there will be mass protests led by MAGA downtown in Miami? It's because I lived there for 20 years, practiced right at this courthouse at the Southern District of Florida, know the streets of it well, know the politics of Miami really well. In fact, in 2020, I was an outside poll watcher at a precinct in Coral Gables, Florida, where I watched a relatively small band of Trumpers waving giant flags as weapons attacked physically a young Republican woman who challenged them. And in the end result was she was arrested by police. I'm going to talk about police presence and why I'm also concerned. Now, look, in the several days since the indictment, there has been some coordinated effort between the the Secret Service, the federal marshals, and the county sheriff and the city police, the city of Miami police. But I'm not sure they were able to get a plan properly in place in time. And I will tell you that the finest of Miami have had problems with crowd control and protests in the past. I was there 20 years ago when Elian Gonzalez, pursuant to a court order, was removed from his aunt to be placed back with his father, a Cuban resident who came back to get Elian after his mother had died trying to get to the United States. And just that protest, which tended to be up to 5,000 people, overwhelmed the police department. This will be many magnitudes larger than that. I can expect in and around the courthouse, and there's basically 3 roads into the courthouse and Highway 95, State Road 95, and an off-ramp right near the courthouse, that will become flooded with, it could be up to 10 or 15,000 people to support Donald Trump. In addition to Donald Trump blowing the whistle to get his MAGA supporters to protect him, defend him, fight for him. Listen to those words. Donald Trump has used code words just recently and even slightly altered them, but I picked up on it. He used to always call Democrats like me and others socialists and Marxists and the like, but he started using the word communist and communist. And he started doing that 3 days ago after indictment. And the reason he's using communist is because he's blowing a whistle to the Cuban and other exile community, some of which vote, some of which don't vote, some of which are American citizens, some of which aren't. But that is a giant trigger word in that community and other exile communities when you talk about communists. So that's why he's using that word, and that's to stir up this and foment this discontent. I'll tell you another place where it's been happening, especially escalating since Donald Trump announced that he needed to be defended and come protect him on the day of arraignment on local South Florida Latin radio. I listened to South Florida Latin radio during the election, and it was constant haranguing that trying to associate, this is in 2020, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris with communism, socialism, and Marxism, constantly in Spanish. And there is a voting bloc, and it's certainly a group of people that support Donald Trump that maybe don't vote or can't vote that listen to Spanish radio all day long in South Florida. They will come out. They will come out in droves and they will fly the flag of Donald Trump, literally. They will show up in whatever car or vehicle they have, including pickup trucks. Some of them may be armed. Let's talk about what's going on in Florida because of Ron DeSantis. This is a right to carry state since the Supreme Court ruled on the Second Amendment and the right for everyone to bear arms. You no longer need a concealed weapons permit, licensing, registration, or training in Miami or Florida to have a handgun, to have a weapon. Expect that many of the people in that crowd and the police, law enforcement presence needs to expect this, will be armed. Let's be frank, a lot of Miami is armed. And they were when there was a concealed weapons permit program, and they are certainly now that there's no longer under DeSantis a concealed weapons permit program. So I fear for people and their surroundings. Law enforcement there, the city of Miami law enforcement, has a history of either doing one of two things. They either over-respond to protesters and their civil liberties violations, or they under-respond and allow the protesters to kind of do what they want to do. I predict it may be the latter here, that many in the law enforcement community are not going to be overly aggressive or be policing this group of their neighbors who may be there to cause mischief and attack the courthouse. Now, that's the split screen. The other side of the split screen is federal government prosecutors are watching what's going on in the streets of Miami, and they will attribute and pin bad things that happen out there to Donald Trump during his arraignment. And when they come to talk on Tuesday at around 3:30 about conditions of bail and trial and pretrial detention and restrictions on Donald Trump's liberty and restrictions on his ability to talk about the case, they're going to open the window or point to the window, and there's a lot of windows at the Wilkie Ferguson courthouse, and tell the judge, and the judge is not going to be immune to this, and the magistrate judge, we think it's going to be Goodman, and they're going to say, see what Donald Trump has done? Look at the crowds, look at the riots, look at the attacks. This is why we need pretrial restrictions on his liberty. That outside the courtroom is going to come inside the courtroom because the federal government and prosecutors are going to make it that way. And then Donald Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche plus whoever, because he sounds like he's been shopping all day to try to find local South Florida, Southern District of Florida counsel, and has so far been unsuccessful. Whoever's going to be standing next to Todd Blanche as the local lawyer, hint, hint, it's not going to be Lindsay Halligan, who's going to be out of this case. But whoever those two lawyers are, that second lawyer with Todd Blanche, they're going to have to on the fly say, oh, no, that shouldn't be held against him. This is just public protest. He's the leading candidate for the Republicans, blah, blah, blah. But what happens outside enters that courtroom through that arraignment process and pretrial setting process. So I'm here on this hot take to talk about somebody who's lived, cares about that community deeply. Miami's a second home for me. But I have watched what has happened with different protests, the Elian Gonzalez protests that were run out of control. Police couldn't control it during early 2000. And what Trump and his followers and supporters and henchmen are trying to foment to overwhelm a police presence in downtown Miami, where there are only 3 roads in and 1 road out around that courthouse. So police better be ready. Federal marshals better be ready. Secret Service better be ready, because there is going to be a protest unlike the one we saw in New York. New York's a different place. First of all, there's only a couple of ways into New York, bridges and tunnels, unless you live there. And there's not a lot of Trumpers who live in Manhattan. It's a very blue, it's the bluest of blue locations of urban centers. So people that were coming in to do mischief had to come in by bridge and tunnel, and it's $20 a head to get in. And trust me, that cut down on the amount of people. Plus, it's New York. We see crazy mishigas every day. That's a Yiddish legal term meaning craziness every day. So, you know, this little park that was in front of the courthouse down there, a couple of roads in, and New York's finest, they were able to control that. And it was a big ado about nothing. Miami is different. I've been there, I've seen protests, and I know the police presence and what could happen if there's a low response. There'll be a high amount of potential violence. So we got to watch for that on Tuesday as law enforcement and prosecutors look to see what's happening on the street and bring it into the courthouse. I'm going to follow it closely only on the MeidasTouch network. I do it on hot takes just like this one at the intersection of politically charged litigation, law, and politics. On Wednesdays and Saturdays, we pull it all together in a podcast on the MeidasTouch network called Legal AF with my two co-anchors. And then if you like what I'm doing on these kind of hot takes, you like the quantity, the quality of them, give me a thumbs up. It'll keep it coming to you. Open up a dialogue with me in chats. I've been known to answer back, and we can have a discussion. And follow me, Michael Popok, on all things social media at MS Popok. This is Michael Popok, Legal AF reporting.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.